Branch. Welcome back to Upfront. How are you?
I'm good. Good to be here. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's been a while. The last time that you and I talked, you were gearing up to release your documentary, Searching for Shaniqua, which I just thought, that title
Right.
and just that entire examination on African American names and how we all react to names like Shaniqua and all of those names with a la or a sha or a
Right.
ta. How
Yeah.
we as an African American community react to those names. Great documentary. But you're
Thank you.
actually back with a new passion project. And when I saw that you were doing this on social media, I was like, I got to reach out to this brother. Janet Jackson is one of my all-time. Anyone that knows me knows that I am in love with Janet Jackson. And I saw this and I was like, we got to have this brother on the show. Race, Gender, and Wardrobe Malfunctions on Janet Jackson and Media. This is a new class, a curriculum that you have written and that you've
Yep.
created. And let's talk about this because, again, I just find this whole idea, this whole topic of discussion so fascinating.
Yeah. So I'm a professor at Goucher College, and we have this opportunity to create courses that deal with issues that go across disciplines, whether it be business, sociology, art. And they asked if I had an idea for a class. And the first thing that came to mind is also my favorite artist is Janet, right? So I thought, oh, I would love to spend 13 weeks talking about Janet Jackson, and thinking about it in sort of the broader sort of sociological terms, some of the business terms, what was her impact, and then taking it a step further, like what was sort of the impact of her work on the industry, right, and on people. And so I put that together. And oddly, the first response was, our students won't get Janet possibly because they were so young, which I know, but we teach them Shakespeare. They weren't around for Shakespeare either, right? So my thought is we just catch them up like we do with every other dead white person that we teach in college, right? We just catch them up, right? So certainly we can catch up with Janet, where she's still current, and it turned out students were interested. The class filled really quickly, and we're talking now about sort of all these issues. And the one thing about the class that I love is that I'm actually introducing Janet to students who know who she is, but they had not really fully understand. They didn't fully understand what her impact was on the industry.
Class, basically, you're using her career as a case study to examine how race, gender, and politics play a role in how media is created, marketed, and
Mhm.
and basically consumed. And what I think is so interesting is, Janet's career. We've seen it's had its ebbs and flows, and I think we've seen her go from this massive, iconic musician to struggling to sell albums. And for those of us that grew up in that time when she, it was her, Whitney Houston, and Madonna, it's just like, why is this album, not selling well? So Phil, if we can, let's talk about this curriculum, kind of go through it, if you will.
Right. So one of the first things is to, it's something you said is sort of one of the first things we talked about in class was let's situate what Black crossover music is, right? If we're talking about Janet Jackson, we're talking about Lionel Richie in that era. We're talking about Patti LaBelle's switching from her soul music to sort of new attitude era. What does it mean to be a pop artist and be Black in the 80s, right? So I'm situating sort of like not just how famous she became or how impactful she became, but what did a Black artist have to do in order to be seen at that level when we were still segregating radio stations? You would win a Black award at the Grammys, a Black award at the American Music Awards, where we were still separating everybody. So the first thing is a historical approach, not going back to the 1800s, but let's just go back to the 80s and look at how music was being packaged and sold, right? And I think what that does is set up for Janet. When you see Black artists were often asked to strip down who they were in order to kind of reach this mass audience. And what you see with Janet Jackson and her third album, Control, is that she's not stripping down. She's actually keeping that level of funk, R&B in the music, and it worked. And it worked really, really well. And it becomes a bit of a blueprint for Black artists to kind of keep who they are in the music and still promote that to the mainstream public, because that wasn't what was happening. You take Lionel Richie from the Commodores and then you tell him to smooth out the voice, smooth out the tempos, whatever, and it works, right? Make it more poppy. There's nothing wrong with that. But that whole machine was asking Black artists to be less, right? And then you have Janet with the help of Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis and everybody else involved saying, well, let's just be, right? And it worked, right? And then we see that trend kind of continue. So it starts with that historical context, not just that Control was a hit, but the environment in which it became a hit, right? In a segregated environment, a segregated music environment, even in videos, which you know, right? And then we move from there to talk about the work. Because I didn't want to just jump right into Justin Timberlake, although he interrupted my syllabus by apologizing. So we had to skip a few weeks and talk about that apology. So he messed up my syllabus, but we were happy. This is life. So we move forward. But talk about who situate her historically, and then talk about the work, talk about what the work meant, and then look at the layers. Like, okay, so who controls image? Who controls voice? Who controls? Let's talk about how bodies are viewed. Let's talk about how voice is viewed, and then situate her against a Madonna or a Whitney, and start to really examine how all of these figures kind of played into each other, and kind of locate who's actually in control, right? Janet's in control of her music, but who's in control of the music industry, right? So when we start looking through a lens, let's talk about it honestly, right? Um, and it's hard. I'm at a predominantly white institution at this point. I'm at Goucher College. And for students, I'm teaching them that it's okay to look at sort of race dynamics and not take everything personally. So it's okay to say white men ran the music industry, and understand that I am not saying, or no one in class is saying, all white men would do this thing to Janet Jackson or to any other artist, right? And it's also a learning process for them to be able to talk about delicate issues. So it's been good to use something that's fun, like Janet, and to kind of talk about those hard-hitting issues.
Well, one of the things that I thought was really interesting too, and as you're talking about control, I had this conversation also with another guest on the show for today, Sakan Sembla, who I had mentioned, actress and star of the new series Delilah. She talked about watching Janet really take control of her career and her imagery. She was 20 something years old when she came out with the Control album, and she was all covered. She had the black turtleneck. She was, wearing the suits that, but it wasn't until she basically got into her mid 30s that she was like, okay, now I want to be sexy. Now I want to show my body. And she said she thought that was really interesting because most of the singers that were in their 20s were showing the skin, when she was like, no, that's not what I want to do right now. But
Right,
when I want to show you that, I will. And she eventually did that. And so she loved the fact and respected the fact that when she said she was in control, she truly was in control of her imagery, when she wanted to be sexy, when she didn't want to be sexy, when she wanted to be serious. Rhythm Nation was all about social empowerment. That was
right,
her time that, listen, I want to speak about who I am as a person, not
right,
just as a pop music performer, but as a Black woman living in the United States.
right. And I think what's significant about that is that it wasn't just her taking control; it was her taking control in the face of sort of racist ideology that says you have to be this in order to sell records, right? So you go from Control, which is, a major hit, and then they want her to make an album, from what I've done in my research, something that they wanted to call Scandal, like a follow-up to Control that just kind of hit on the same things and talked about family. And I'm even more in control, right? That kind of thing. And she didn't want to do a sequel to Control, and she did Rhythm Nation. And according to all the articles I've read and the research, the label thought we missed an opportunity here, because this could have just been a dance pop heavy album and you would have just sold more records. And then here comes Rhythm Nation and breaks every record in 1990. Like, she wins every Billboard award. It's the top selling album. But from what I understand, they wanted New Agenda to be the first single. She wanted, with Chuck D, which she's talking about being a Black woman. So you
Yeah.
have to think about who Janet Jackson has to be at the height of her career at that point, saying, I want to release an album that's uplifting Black women as my first single off of Rhythm Nation. And in an article I read, Chuck D actually told her, when the label said, I don't know about that, we should go a different direction. He actually said to her, I think the label might be right, but I love this song. Like, listen to them on this, right? Because you want to be able to keep having these messages, and you don't want them to say, well, you did this, so you can't do this anymore. So you have a 22-year-old, 23-year-old woman at the peak of their career ready to jump out, So it's not just control of the music, it's really in control of, like, I have something to say.
What has been the response from your students with this class? Because I remember talking offline, this class was being offered as well as a Beyonce Lemonade class. So what has been the response to this particular class?
The response to this class has been surprising for me, sort of to see students wake up and become aware of something that they thought they knew about and realize they didn't, right? So my students would be somewhere between 19 and 20. You know, they were young when this happened. They know some of it, but they grew up with Janet Jackson as this sort of myth icon, but they didn't really know all of her songs, a lot of them. Um, but they know Justin Timberlake because he's sort of been in when they were kids, he was coming up, right? So they grew up with him on TV, in movies, on the radio, doing the whole thing. And so it's been interesting to watch these young men and women read articles, go back and investigate, and then go, wow, like, how was this able to happen? How was he able to behave this way, say these things, and be as misogynistic as he was, and have this full career and never take any blame? So I'm seeing this whole kind of awakening happen where they're starting to question, like, so who makes that choice? Right? I showed them a clip from the 2008 ESPY Awards where Justin is making fun of the Janet wardrobe, incident, to a whole audience of people laughing and having a good time about it. But he's using it as a stepping stone. And they were just so disgusted by it because in their minds, it was an incident. He apologized, she apologized, but because she's a woman, she took a little bit more blame. And what they're seeing is like, oh, it wasn't that simple. It was an entire industry, mostly male, worked together to continue to uphold his career and left her in the dust. That's why I started with the historical context, because they were like, we didn't know she sold this many records. We didn't know she did all this stuff. And then they get to where Justin is doing what he's doing. They're just like, wow, they were even able to erase this Black woman who was at the peak, right? So what does that mean for anybody else? So watching them be able to rethink their own attachment to sort of their idea of what the incident was about. And even Justin Timberlake, I think he lost a lot of fans in my class. I have no problems with that. Um, and I'm not pushing that. I'm just saying, here's the facts. Here's what happened. What do you think? And it's nice to see them read and come to class, or, we're meeting asynchronously. So they record these videos for me where they kind of process what they're reading. It's been nice to watch their videos where they just kind of think through, like, so what does this mean for me as a woman professionally? What does this mean for me as a white man? What is my responsibility in the career when I go into the professional world, to listen and to be mindful? So it's been nice.
Phill Branch, thank you so much for being a guest today on Upfront. Again, we're talking about his new class on Janet Jackson. And let me make sure I get the title correctly here: Race, Gender, and Wardrobe Malfunctions on Janet Jackson in Media. Phill, how can our listeners stay in contact with you on social media?
So the website for the class is janetclass.com. And if you go there, you'll see all my social media links and my contact. But you can just find me at Phill Branch with two L's, Phill Branch, at Twitter. And my website is philbranch.com, and you can find all my information there. And you can watch the class. So what I'm doing is I'm doing the class on campus, and then I'm also doing a modified version where I do these video podcasts, where you can follow along on the syllabus. And the syllabus is posted on the website, janetclass.com.
All right. Thank you so much, Phill, and best of luck to you
For
for the
Thank you.
rest of the semester.
Yes, time to grade some papers.